I'm Monty. This is the Marriage Bites podcast.
We get real about the joys and challenges of marriage through bites of wisdom we have learned over the years.
Our aim is to share this wisdom with you so your marriage won't bite. Coming to you from fabulous Southwest Idaho, in the marvelous city of Nampa, the Marriage Bites podcast. With me, Monty, and you, Andelin.
Hi, everybody.
This episode is brought to you by peanut butter, that light, tan, creamy stuff that doesn't taste that great and sticks to the roof of your mouth. Ooh, yeah. Probably wondering where that all came from.
I think we needed Michael Scott do-over.
A Michael Scott do-over? That was a fabulous intro. All right, back to seriousness. Welcome to the Marriage Bites podcast, everybody. We're sure glad that you're here and listening. And if you're not here and you're not listening, you don't have to, but you won't get those little nuggets and bites of information that could help you have a better marriage.
That's correct. So what are you up to these days?
Well, I have been up to a lot of work and a lot of toil. I've been working on my muzzleloader to get it to shoot. I've been having some sight issues. My rear sight broke, and then I had to hodgepodge some pieces together to make it so it would shoot properly.
I'm a little uncomfortable with gun and hodgepodge in the same sentence.
If you know me well enough and see the things I do, I hodgepodge things together all the time.
I'm a little nervous about that.
I've only had maybe one, maybe two catastrophic failures of a firearm. So, I mean, doing pretty good.
Okay.
Doing pretty good.
Whatever.
Actually, I've had more than that. Never mind. Scratch that. I just thought of another one.
Okay.
But it was back when I was a kid.
For the most part, I feel like you're pretty safe, so...
I am pretty safe until I'm not. But that's okay. I haven't lost any digits yet.
Haven't lost any fingers.
If there was a camera showing us what's going on, you'll see that I'm moving all my fingers here.
They'll work.
I still have 8 of them. I'm set.
Okay.
So
nice.
On a different topic, I've been thinking about this. I've been actually thinking about giving you a new nickname.
Okay.
So I don't know if you remember earlier in our marriage, I started to call you Andelbuns.
I do remember that.
And I didn't come up with it. All you people out there saying, wow, you called your wife that? What a jerk. Your brother actually came up with it. And I started using that, and it became somewhat clunky, and I started calling you Buns. And one day I realized I'm calling her this in front of people. This is not good.
I remember that.
Yeah, so I've been thinking about maybe having a different, nickname.
What are you thinking?
I'm thinking about calling you Andels. Andel, short for Andelin.
I get it.
And Andels, it's somewhat endearing. Like, it's kind of
It rhymes with sandals.
Andels, sandals. Hey, not bad. I would probably use that in the summertime when you wear sandals.
Okay.
So what's going on with you?
Well, I'm sort of right in the middle of a bunch of harp trio performances, which has been so much fun.
Yes, I got to go watch one last week, and you guys sounded great.
Thank you. It is so much fun. Playing harp is awesome. When you get 3 harps together, it's like triple as awesome. I love it.
Well, because there's 3 of them.
Yes.
So I guess it would be triple.
Yes, that's what I'm saying. But sometimes life as a musician can be a little bit lonely, especially harpists, because harpists and pianists maybe feel this way too, that you can do everything yourself. Sometimes a single note instrument will always need another person to play with. And so they're always collaborating and they're working in groups of people. But as harpists, at least for myself, a lot of times it's just me by myself. And it's so much fun to get together with other people. So yeah, that's what I'm focusing on right now. In addition to all the other things, the kids and keeping the house together. And
it's kind of like going riding motorcycles. It's fun to do it by yourself, but it's more fun to go with someone.
Yeah, we are community creatures as humans.
Herd animals.
Tribal, whatever. We like to be together. We want to be connecting with other people by our nature.
Yeah, for the most part. Anything else that you've been doing?
That's kind of it.
What about those dirty looks you've been giving me lately?
I have been working on those in the mirror sometimes.
You've been doing really good at it, too.
Yeah,
I've
thanks.
noticed that
I've been
there's been an
practicing.
increase in the dirty looks, and I'm like, is she really giving me a dirty look because she's mad, or is she just practicing? So now I know you're just practicing, right?
Yes, for when I need it.
Right. Which is sometimes it's often. What are we talking about today?
Today we are talking about how to deal with uncertainty
Dun dun dun.
in marriage and just in life in general.
Dun dun.
We are human beings, and human beings like to have certainty. The problem is, this world offers us very little actual certainty.
I think we want certainty because it helps us be comfortable.
And we feel safe.
Right. We all want safety and security.
Yeah, and that's normal and natural because obviously, if we didn't have security and certainty, we might die. And we have evolved to want certainty. But like I said, this life offers us very little true certainty. So getting to the place where you can become comfortable with the discomfort of uncertainty will open up many doors.
I think it would certainly bring your anxiety down.
Yes and no. It's sort of like trading one anxiety for another, in a way. But yes, for me, I have experienced a lower amount of anxiety by just embracing the uncertainty rather than trying to control something that is really out of my control.
So we're going to talk about some examples about different types of uncertainty.
Right. So the first thing that came to my mind is, as a parent, a lot of times parents try to keep their kids safe. Of course, we don't want anything bad to happen to our kids. And some mothers especially, and I suppose fathers too, I've talked to a lot more mothers than fathers about this, which is why I say that, but a lot of times parents will really worry that something will happen to their kids, that they'll go to school and something bad will happen, or that they'll go to a friend's house and get hit by a car, or any manner of things that you can dream up.
Well, I think that's to help keep them safe, because then we take actions to help prevent some of those bad things from happening.
Right, but there's no way you can prevent anything bad from happening. If you've ever seen the movie Finding Nemo, you will understand why. Marlin, the father, wants to keep his son safe because it was the last kid out of all those eggs and only one survived, and he wanted to keep him safe. But he kept him so safe that he was stifled. He wasn't able to live a good life, I guess. And then he actually rebelled against his father's controllingness, and then the whole adventure of the whole movie happened.
Well, and even at the beginning, remember, Nemo had that bad flipper thing, and he even believed that he couldn't do things because of the bad flipper, because that's what his dad told him.
That's what he learned, right?
And he eventually learned that, no, that's not the case.
And as parents, I feel like we have done our due diligence in order to keep our kids safe, but that did not prevent anything bad from happening. When our son was 7, we've talked about this before, he was diagnosed with type 1 diabetes. To my knowledge, there is absolutely nothing we could have done to prevent that from happening. There's no safety measures, there's no dietary changes, there's nothing that we could have done to prevent that from happening. So parents will say, I'm keeping my kids safe, I'm feeding them healthy food, I'm doing all these good things, therefore nothing bad will ever happen. That is not true. And then when something does happen, if there's a diagnosis or an accident or some sort of thing, that can be really disruptive to the parents' sense of certainty and security, especially around their children. Unless you've actually faced something like that, you think, oh, I could never do that. I could never handle that. But the truth is, you could. Your kid could get diagnosed with anything at any time. But to be able to acknowledge that without becoming like Marlin is sometimes tricky for some parents. But it's so important, not only for your growth and development, but also for your kids.
And I don't think we're saying that it would be an easy thing.
No.
Definitely not an easy thing, but you can get through it.
Right, and you will. And parents step up and they fight for their kids, and they get their kids the treatment that they need, and they are amazing.
I think they can get through it if they want to. I know plenty of people, heard plenty of stories where people, they really take on the victim mentality and they just never really get over it. And so, but you can. And that's the thing, is even people who say they can if they really want to. Right. And I'm willing to take flack for saying that. I'm sure there's people listening who would disagree with me, but send your flack my way, because it's not true. You can get through it.
Another example is a fear that someone will break into your home. When we were first married, you were working night shift, and we lived in this apartment that was like right at the top of the stairs. So everybody coming in, I could hear them passing by our house and laughing and talking in the hallway.
And the building was 100 years old, so you heard everything.
Yeah. And I had so much fear that something bad would happen. And I eventually got over that fear. And the way to do that for me was, there were several different things, but part of it was just being able to trust myself that if something did happen, I would be able to figure it out. I would be able to protect myself. I had a neighbor growing up who I overheard my mom talking about this once, where she was so afraid for a long time of somebody breaking into her house. And then one time, it happened. Somebody actually did break into their house. I don't know if they were home at the time. But after that, she said the fear of somebody breaking in went away, because she realized, yes, somebody could break into my house. I don't have the certainty that I will be quote unquote safe in my own home, but I know that I can handle it if it did happen. And after that, the fear of that went away. Sometimes there are actions that you can take in order to prevent a bad thing from happening. For example, you can get an alarm system for your home. That doesn't necessarily prevent a break-in, but if it allows you to have a better sense of security and safety, then by all means, do what you need to in order to create a higher sense of safety for yourself. But there will always still be some amount of uncertainty. Somebody could still try to break in even if you have an alarm system. It doesn't stop people from attempting, at least sometimes.
I think one thing that really brings a lot of uncertainty in my line of work or my career, for me or for the person who is a police officer and their family, is that uncertainty of their loved one not coming home after going to work. I mean, let's face it. Things are more dangerous for police officers right now at the end of 2022 than they have been ever. And it's due to a variety of reasons. It's political. It's untruths about law enforcement officers being painted with a broad brush. When there's one bad apple out there, we're all painted with that broad brush. And people decide to act on those things. And it creates a real dangerous environment. And so that can create a lot of uncertainty for that officer, but for that family.
Yeah, it really affects the wife or husband and the children as well. For me, being a stay-at-home mom, our entire livelihood was provided by his income, by his being here. And so for a lot of stay-at-home wives and moms, they send their husband to work, and I mean, yes, he could die in a car crash, even if he's working a very quote-unquote safe job. There is uncertainty inherent in everything that we do, but I think especially with certain jobs like first responders and military, and there are a few others that are by nature more dangerous than quote-unquote a regular job, that we have to face the idea that something could happen at any time. And if you are trying to convince yourself that nothing bad will happen, and trying to sort of lie to yourself that nothing bad will ever happen out of a desire to feel that greater sense of certainty, that itself is anxiety producing, because deep down you know that it's not true that he'll be safe for sure. You can't be sure. So it's easy to try to convince yourself that nothing bad will ever happen to yourself or your kids or your spouse. But when you're working in a job where you see those bad things happening to people all the time, it's a lot harder to believe that. It's a lot harder to convince yourself that bad things won't happen. And so you have to find a way to become comfortable with the uncertainty that things may not go the way you want every time.
I think with this kind of thing is that any kind of uncertainty, what helps you to get through things that are uncertain or things that might be scary, is to mentally prepare yourself. And we've talked about that before. How do you mentally prepare for your spouse not coming home?
Well, you can only prepare to a certain extent.
You really can. I think just having that fortitude and knowing that, hey, I'm going to get through it if this ever happens. Heaven forbid it happens, but if it does, I will get through it. That might be all that you need. That, I think, is how you get through it, or how you deal with that uncertainty of that one.
I think facing the fact that there is no real certainty is the key. You either face the anxiety of trying to trick yourself into believing something that isn't true, or you are facing the discomfort of knowing that you really can't control every aspect of your life so that it turns out just the way you want so that you can be happy.
Right.
So a lot of people ask me, well, don't you worry sending him to work every day? And no, I don't, but it's because I choose not to allow myself to worry in that way. I trust you and I trust the people you work with that if anything were to happen, they would be right there as soon as they could. They would do everything that they could to have each other's back. And I also trust myself to know that I could deal with it. I could handle whatever came my way. For me, also having an anchor, having something to anchor into has been a big part of being able to do that. For me, it has been my belief in God and my spiritual practice, believing that if I stay close to God, He's got my back. That God is a loving Father in heaven who wants what's best for His children, believing that He's there to support me and to help me through it if anything were to happen. That has been a huge anchor for me. I know not everybody believes in God or has a spiritual practice, but every person can find something to anchor into.
Well, I think in that case, talking about never coming back, I mean, we had that experience early in my career where I suffered that gunshot wound and almost died. And so we kind of had to deal with that. It was in our face.
Right at the beginning.
Right at the beginning.
Yeah, we faced mortality in this job within the first 3 months of you working as a police officer.
And even as a young family, we dealt with our oldest son and his diabetes pretty early in our child raising. And so we were hit with a few big things. I mean, they were right in our face. And I'm not saying they are bigger than others. I know there's people who've lost children, and I can't imagine. I can't imagine that.
Me neither.
Man, heaven forbid that ever happened to anybody.
Oh, yeah.
But we've had some things that have happened that have been right in our face. And so we have that unique perspective of dealing with some of these uncertain things.
Right. So when you're little or when you're a young adult or whatever, sometimes people, I've seen them sort of create this bubble of safety and certainty around themselves. But our bubbles were shattered when our son was diagnosed and when you almost died, in a way that we're like, oh, but we had to face that, and now we know we can handle that.
Well, and remember too, when I had been recovering from that gunshot wound about a month when my dad passed away. I'm like, what is going on?
Yeah.
And there was just a lot of things. I think one thing especially with our faith is that we believe in eternal marriage. And I know a lot of people, they get married and they think, everything is going to be perfect. Everything is wonderful. And it not always is. There's things that creep into marriages. There's infidelity. There's maybe a death of a spouse or a child. There's could be a life-altering disease. But I know with our faith, we think that, oh, nothing will happen now that we are married and we're going to be together forever and we're just so happy. And that might end up being the case, but there's a lot of uncertainty that comes with a marriage.
Right. And as soon as you're like, oh, my spouse will never leave me, that's when your marriage has become vulnerable. As soon as you take your spouse for granted and you just expect that they will always be there, suddenly you stop taking care of your marriage. You're like, oh, it's fine. Now we're married. Now
I can let myself go. I don't have to put on deodorant or take a shower anymore. Let my beard grow out.
Now we don't have to actually nurture the relationship because we're married and we've got them locked in.
Yeah,
right?
We've got them locked in.
Right.
Yeah.
But that is what opens up your relationship to becoming vulnerable. As soon as you think nothing bad will happen, that's when the bad things can happen because you're not watching for it and taking care of it and noticing what's going on.
Right.
I mean, nobody gets married thinking, hopefully we break up in 6 or 7 years. Nobody gets married thinking that something will go wrong in their marriage and that it will break up someday.
Right.
Nobody that I know, anyway. But you can never know for sure that in 20 years you'll still be married. Sometimes things take a turn, and sometimes breaking up of the marriage is the right thing to do. So why get married in the first place? People get married for a variety of reasons. But if you're getting married because you want the certainty of somebody being there, I submit you're getting married for the wrong reason. Because there is no certainty. You can create for yourself a false sense of security, a false sense of certainty, but it's never true. It's never real. Sometimes people will have an anxiety about something bad happening and lean to their spouse to fix it for them. Like, sometimes somebody will say, well, promise me nothing bad will happen, or promise me you'll never leave me, or promise me this, in an attempt to get their spouse to relieve their anxiety about uncertainty. The problem is that creates a codependency between the two in the relationship. Like, now the spouse is like, well, now I have to show up this certain way, because if I don't, she'll be anxious or she'll be upset, and I don't want her to be upset. And then it creates this codependency, where if you can get confident in yourself, yes, I want to be married. Yes, I love my spouse. And I can also admit to myself that it may not always be this way. And whatever happens, whatever comes my way, I will be able to take care of it. I will be strong enough. I can trust myself enough to be able to handle it. That is when you become comfortable with the discomfort of uncertainty. You're smiling about something. What is it?
I am, and I actually was thinking about all those movies you see out there where the man is going off to war and the woman's like, oh, please come back to me. Promise that you won't be hurt. Promise that you won't die. And then the guy's like, I promise I won't die. And then they go off to war and then they don't die and they come back and, ew, everything's so wonderful.
But we love hearing those stories because we think, oh, if this happens in the movies, it must happen in real life too. When we think about it rationally, we're like, that doesn't make any sense. But in our minds, we do kind of think that that is another tick in the box for certainty. So one problem with pretending or trying to convince yourself that nothing bad will happen and having that sort of bubble around you is that if and or when something unwanted happens, you're not prepared for it at all. You get completely blindsided because you spent all of your energy on this perception that nothing bad can happen and that everything is safe and everything is certain. So now you're dealing with a change in your perception of reality. You're having to deal with wrapping your mind around the world not being the way you thought it was, the way you tried to convince yourself it was. And you're also, at the same time, having to deal with the event that happened. So it's sort of like a 1-2 punch. That not only is your worldview shattered, but also now you have this unwanted thing to deal with at the same time. That can be really hard for people to deal with all at once. So does this mean we should just think about the worst case scenario all the time?
No.
I don't think so. To me, that would be totally exhausting. To just be thinking all day about all the bad things that could happen in order to be prepared for something bad happening.
I know, you'd be a worry wart.
It would be just exhausting to try to think of all the bad things that could happen. And that's not the way that I personally like to spend the most of my time. There are times when, say, a kid wants to go and ride their bike to Walmart, and it's a really busy street, and so I say no. Or I say, okay, you can go, but you have to take this other route, in a way that's like, okay, let's just be smart about this. Not in like, I'm so afraid something bad will happen, I'm not going to let you go anywhere. But like, how can we do this in a smarter way that mitigates the risk? So there's times when, yes, I think, okay, what could go wrong? And then how could we avoid that? But overall, I just sort of put everything under a blanket statement of, if something bad happens, I'll figure it out. And that sort of covers it for me. And then sometimes there will be like maybe a more specific scenario that comes up that I'll need to work through into more specifics. But for the most part, like, just having that self-trust, the anxiety of something bad happening is alleviated by telling myself, if it happened, we would figure it out. The key here is to get comfortable with uncertainty, which brings with it an amount of discomfort. But that's when your world opens up to you. That's when you can take a risk. That's when you can really move your life forward rather than try to stay in this false sense of security that sometimes people try to build around themselves. Ironically, knowing that something bad could happen to in your marriage, for example, is when your marriage is actually the most secure, because you are taking care of it, you're watchful, you're paying attention, you're in it. You're not separating yourself from it. And because you're not taking your spouse for granted. You know there could be a day that you wake up and they're not there. And so you are able to then embrace every day for the gift that it is. Because we can't really truly lie to ourselves. When we are trying to convince ourselves of something that's not true, our brain knows that that's not true. We can't lie to ourselves, really. I mean, people try, and sometimes they sort of succeed, but...
So let us know how you all deal with uncertainty. How do you deal with those anxieties in life? We just talked about what we think about it, but what do you as the listeners think about it? What helps you to deal with uncertainty?
What's your anchor? What's your grounding? That's what I would really like to know.
I would also like to know what your favorite color is. And perhaps, what is your favorite pizza?
Okay. Yeah, that will definitely come in handy.
I think the last thing, and I think this is really important, this has to do with our sponsor. What kind of peanut butter do you enjoy? Because this podcast was brought to you by peanut butter. I like Skippy.
And if you have a really cool story about your marriage or your relationship or something that you would like to share with the world, we want to hear it too.
If there's a topic that you would like us to talk about, shoot us an email, because we'd love to see what you guys think, and perhaps we can have a discussion about it. Thanks for listening to the Marriage Bites podcast.
Be sure to subscribe so you don't miss out on any of the fun.
Let us know what you took away from this episode by sending us an email at info@andelinprice.com.
You can also see what we're up to on Facebook and Instagram at Andelin Price Coaching. Or you can visit my website, andelinprice.com, to learn more. See you next week.
Bye. And test 1 2 3 test. Never mind. Filter just caught something.
Good. I'm distracted by the dog barking. I feel like we had such a better discussion earlier.
We should record our discussions earlier.
That's what I said we should do, and you're like, no, I want to read through it first.
Well, what the heck?
I should have listened to myself.